In this video, we're going to be talking about the Goodman Heat Pump lineup. We're going to be going through their single stage systems all the way up to their inverter systems. And we're going to break down which systems qualify for some of the heat pump tax credits that are available currently as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. We're going to go through their efficiency ratings, and we're going to go through the differences between the actual systems to help you decide which system is actually right for your specific climate. Because the truth is, there's definitely not a one size fits all product that's best, across the board. If you live in a northern climate, for example, the recommendations in terms of which heat pumps are going to work better in your state or region are going to differ drastically compared to, a heat pump that's designed maybe to work better in a climate like Texas. But we'll go through all that and more in this video. But before we get started, if you haven't done so already, please make sure you smash that like button for the algorithm and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. We put out daily and weekly content on how you can get the best HVAC for your home. So if you find this content helpful, subscribing to the channel is a free way you can show your support, and it is much appreciated. So that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. And again, this is going to be a high-level overview of the Goodman heat pump lineup. So I actually have the products pulled up on my screen here, and we'll just kind of go through them one by one. And as we're going through them, I'm actually going to show you which ones qualify for the heat pump tax credit, and we're going to break that down on the Energy Star site. But first off, if you're, in really when it comes down to, the reasons that you choose a heat pump, let's talk about kind of the differences between every heat pump. There's a couple things that improve with a higher end heat pump, right? Number one, and this is a comfort factor, is that it's going to be quieter. When you look at the difference between something like this GSZ M4, right? This is a basic SEER 2 14 SEER heat pump. This is a basic single stage heat pump. What's the difference between this system and let's say, this GSZV9 or the S6, which is their side discharge system? Both of these are inverters. The biggest difference is going to be quiet. And then the second biggest difference is going to be efficiency. So both these systems are going to be drastically more efficient than their single stage counterparts. However, even if you live in a really hot climate where you could benefit from that, you don't just necessarily want to get any heat pump because, for example, one of the differences between the side discharge system, which I have pulled up here, and the GSZV9, which is also their inverter-driven heat pump, is that the GSZV9 actually holds up better in higher ambient temperatures, whereas this is just not going to perform, and it starts to derate once it gets past 110 or 115 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you live in a very hot climate in the middle of the desert, this side discharge system might not work for you. And if you are putting one in anyways, you're just going to want to make sure that you account for the load at those higher temperatures, and you have, multiple systems for your house. Because, for example, I just know this off the top of my head, the 5-ton version of this side discharge system, it actually derates to about a little over 3 tons of capacity. So you're talking about a 40% deration in terms of its efficiency as a heat pump. And so that's just something you want to consider, because when that is running in cooling mode in the peak of summer, if you live in a really hot climate like Palm Springs or Phoenix, Arizona, you're going to want to make sure that that's accounted for when you're sizing that system for your home. But why would you choose, a basic single stage system? Well, the benefit of a single stage system is, number one, it's cheap to repair. It's more expensive to operate because it's not as efficient. But the benefit basically is that it's a simple system. It's cheaper to install. The equipment itself is cheaper. And then although it will, have more wear and tear items on it, for example, has a traditional PSC motor, which means that it's going to have a run capacitor powering both the fan and the compressor. Those capacitors are wear and tear items, and those get replaced basically every few years. Depending on, what region you're in, that's going to vary more often. For example, in Phoenix, we almost replace capacitors like every couple years just because you go through capacitors a lot there, just because the system's running so much in the summer. And single stage systems, require a capacitor, whereas inverter systems, they have capacitors built into the inverter board, but it's just not a replacement item. So although that inverter board might go bad every few years, it's not something that you're having to tinker with every year. We're basically just checking to make sure everything is operational every time we're doing annual maintenance, whereas this single stage system is going to have a few more wear and tear items on it, but they're cheaper to repair, cheaper to maintain, but they are more expensive to operate. So, the situations where we recommend these is, number one, if it's a small house, right? If you have an apartment or a condo or something where it's like 1,000 square feet or less, or same thing, just single family house that's smaller, you're not really going to benefit from the higher end systems unless comfort is a factor, in which case you're trying to get a Daikin fit or a really quiet HVAC system, like this side discharge unit that we showed you. The benefit here again is going to be that it's a comfort jump, but because your bill might already only be $50 or $100 a month, so you're not spending a ton of money on your electric bill in the summer in a smaller house, you're not really going to see the benefit of going to a higher efficiency system. So in summary, these single stage systems are good because they're cheap to install, cheap to maintain, and they're just a basic bang for your buck, simple system to work on, and they're reliable, right? And it's just something that if you're just putting this in a condo, a smaller home, this is probably what I would recommend. And the scenarios between these other systems, now when you're going through here, there's lots of systems I'm not talking about, like this GSZ16. That's because all these systems that just say SEER next to their rating are actually SEER 1 rated systems. So these are all being phased out anyways. So unless it says SEER 2, there's not going to be much of a difference between, these systems. So that's why we're not talking about these SEER 1 systems, because these are actually all going to be phased out. So if we jump up to this GSC H5, what's the difference here? Difference is that it's a little bit more efficient. This is still a single stage system. It's up to 15.2 SEER 2, 7.8 on the HSPF2 rating. SEER 2 stands for Seasonal Energy Efficiency Ratio. And the difference between SEER 2 and SEER 1 is that SEER 2 actually accounts for when the equipment is tested and that SEER rating is determined. They actually have to use what's called a static pressure reading of 0.5 inches of water column. Now, that might not mean anything to you. In layman's terms, what it means is it's a more accurate reflection of the field conditions that we see, because SEER 1 products are technically rated with a 0.1 static pressure, which I wish we saw 0.1 static pressure, 0.1 inches of water column, because that would mean we have properly sized, or not properly sized ductwork, but we would have plenty of airflow in our home and everything's flowing really well, because at 0.1 inches of water column total external static pressure, what that means is that your ductwork is the right size for your home. The truth is that about 80% of ductwork in North America is undersized, both for the home and for the system. It's just barely sized big enough to where it will work and it will keep up. And a lot of times it's even not even sized for that. And so when we're doing bids, we can go in and correct that, because if you have a 2,000 square foot house, for example, and let's say the ductwork is slightly undersized, normally with 1 or 2 duct runs, we can make that system breathe a lot better. And especially we'll add a couple supply runs and maybe 1 return. And the process of doing that makes for a big difference in terms of how the system is going to perform, because it's going to breathe better. But the bottom line is SEER 2 systems are actually, even if it looks like a moderate, increase in terms of its efficiency, the efficiency rating is actually more accurate in terms of what you're going to see in terms of real world conditions. So the benefit to this system, if you're comparing that to that other single stage system we looked at, why would you jump up to this 15.2 SEER 2 system, is really that this system qualifies for the heat pump tax credit. So if you look here, this is tax credit eligible. That's on the 1.5 ton systems up to the 5 ton systems. Now, the catch with that is that it's only eligible in these southern states. So none of these Goodman heat pump lineups or heat pump systems in the lineup, whether it's the C7, which we'll talk about in a second, that is a 2-stage system, or the V9, which we talked about briefly, which is the inverter-driven system, none of those systems qualify in these northern blue states. So if you look at the blue states here, the blue is symbolic of, cold climate heat pump performance. And in order for a system to qualify as a cold climate heat pump, it has to maintain a COP, which stands for coefficient of performance, 1.75, and it also has to maintain 70% of its capacity compared to its temperature, 47 degrees Fahrenheit. So if it's running at 2 tons of heating capacity, at 47 degrees Fahrenheit, then when it goes down to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, it would have to maintain 1.5 tons, for example, of output, roughly, in order for that system to qualify as a cold climate heat pump. And unfortunately, none of these heat pumps qualify. And if you're curious or you're on the fence about a product and you want to know whether something qualifies for a heat pump tax credit in your region, you can go to this Energy Star site, which I'll make sure to link in the description below for you. And you can click on this where it says explore models, and you can literally start to type in that model number. So for example, if we type in the GSZS6, so GSZS6 here, and it may or may not pull up because this one doesn't qualify for any rebates. So let's see if the GSZV9 qualifies. So you can see it's a little finicky, but it did pull up. You can see none of these systems are tax credit eligible in the north, but they are in the south. And so that's what this column here says, is that this is a tax credit eligible heat pump in the south, not in the north. So just make sure you're on it and paying attention to that, because as you can see, it looks like right here, the systems that qualify on that particular model are the 2-ton, the 3-ton, and the 4-ton outdoor unit, but it has to be paired with a specific indoor air handler and or furnace combo in order for that system to qualify. And so just keep that in mind. Sometimes the furnace doesn't matter. It just, you can see, as long as it's paired with the coil, it will qualify, or the coil and air handler. But bottom line is, this is a great resource, and this is how you can verify whether or not a system qualifies in your specific region. Now, going back to these other heat pump lineups. So, in summary, the biggest reason you would jump to this single stage, 15 SEER 2 system right here is because it's going to qualify for that heat pump tax credit if you're in one of those southern regions. And that alone is honestly the price difference between the H5 and the M4 or the B4 is probably the same as that tax credit. So it would be definitely worth it if you're in a region where that qualifies, or a state where that qualifies, to upgrade to that single stage system. Now, what about a 2-stage system? Should you consider, something like this GSZ C7? Well, the difference between a 2-stage system and a single stage system is what it sounds like. When this system first kicks on, it kicks on in 2 stages of heating and 2 stages of cooling. So that means it'll come on at, let's say, a ballpark of 50% of its full capacity, and it'll run there. And then it'll kick up to 100% capacity after 10-15 minutes of runtime, or depending on a call for cooling from the thermostat, depending on how the system is set up. And so the benefit of this is, one, it's more efficient. As you can see, the SEER 2 rating and the HSPF 2 rating are both higher. But as far as comfort is concerned, this is going to offer a little bit more comfort. And so you can see here, it says 65% is where first stage capacity comes in. It's not going to be as quiet as some of the inverter systems. So if comfort is something you're really after, and you're really looking to get the most comfortable, quietest system, I don't know that I would go with this 2-stage system, because in my experience, the difference in price between a 2-stage system like this C7 jumping up to the side discharge system like this S6, they're almost neck and neck in terms of being the same price. And part of the reason why is, even though this has a variable speed compressor, variable speed fan motor on this GSZ S6, it's a smaller footprint. So the unit itself is smaller, and so that's part of why the system is a little bit less expensive to manufacture, because it does use less copper, it's just a smaller footprint. And so it is a smaller unit. There's also less shipping costs. You can fit more of these on a truck. So I think that's kind of why these kind of come in neck and neck in terms of price point. And if you need the absolute most efficient system, you're going to jump up to this V9, which is I believe 22.5, up to 22.5 SEER 2 system. Now, why would you go for, this SEER 2 system compared to this GSZS6, a side discharge system? Well, in summary, just to kind of wrap up on this 2-stage system, I'm not a big fan of 2-stage systems because, like I said, in my experience, if I had to choose between a side discharge inverter system, that's going to be whisper quiet by comparison. When this system kicks on, it runs in quiet mode, and it can be as low as 43 decibels, whereas even this 2-stage system is going to be somewhere around 68 to 70 decibels. So it's much louder. That's still pretty quiet. It's going to be quiet compared to your older systems, because this system, as well as the H5, have a sound blanket on the compressor that helps quiet things down. So it's going to be quieter than what you're used to if you're replacing an air conditioner or heat pump that's 20 years old. But it's night and day compared to this, where you could literally be barbecuing outside and have this side discharge inverter kick on, or the V9 22 SEER top of the line system kick on, and you're not even going to hear them when they first kick on. That's how quiet they are. So that's why I really like these systems. And typically when we start looking at the higher end systems, when we're giving people a few options, we're typically going with an inverter option like the side discharge. We're going to offer a single stage option, and we might offer a top of the line, inverter option. And the reason is just because oftentimes the 2-stage system does not make sense, because for, a little bit, this typically the same investment, you're going to be able to get this inverter size discharge system. And then for a little bit higher investment, you can get, a full blown inverter, which is going to maximize efficiency if you go with this GSZ V9, and it's going to be quieter. And just in our experience, customers are typically happier with either of these systems when compared to a two-stage system. So that's why we recommend those. So going back over here to the Energy Star data, as you can see on the C7, this two-stage system, it does not qualify. Same thing in those colder climates. And the same is true for the GSZ V9. So if you are looking for a cold climate heat pump, unfortunately, Goodman does not have a cold climate heat pump as of the filming of this video in 2024. Now, that may change towards, the end of the year or into next year as Goodman, a lot of the new refrigerants are going to be released. And so when you look at, if you're not in the market to replace your system right now and you don't need to, you're not in a rush to replace your system and you're waiting, there will be new systems coming out in the next few years that may qualify as a cold climate heat pump, meaning that they keep up in those lower ambient temperatures and will in turn qualify for that heat pump tax credit that is available right now. But the bottom line is you just want to make sure that if you're in a climate where, it's extremely cold or extremely hot, you're going to get a system that's going to work as designed, because the worst, it could be very disappointing if you put in a system thinking it's going to work well in your climate and then you come to find out it doesn't. And right now what I want to do to articulate this point is I'm actually going to do a deep dive into the manuals on some of these systems so you can see for yourself when I'm talking about coefficient of performance, which explains how the system performs in cold climates as well as how these systems perform in high ambient temperatures. But before we do that, if you haven't done so already, please make sure you smash that like button for the algorithm. And again, consider subscribing to the channel if you're enjoying this content so far. So right now, I actually have the product specification sheet pulled up with the performance data for both this GSZ-V9 as well as this GSZ-S6. And again, this is that side discharge heat pump. And we're going to compare the cold weather performance. I'm going to start in the cold weather performance, honestly, just because the chart is a little bit easier to read, because you can see the cold weather performance is sideways like this, so it's kind of annoying. In the field, we could just turn the manual sideways, but on the computer, it's a little bit more difficult when I'm pulling up these manuals. So when you look here and you look at, so this is the 2-ton version of the GSZ-V9, and this right here is the outdoor ambient temperature. It goes from, just to explain how this chart reads, this right now what we're looking at is heating performance in a variety of temperatures, right? So if you're in Phoenix, Arizona, you probably don't care about this chart as much because it rarely gets below 40, maybe 35 degrees. And as you can see, the capacity doesn't really drop. The coefficient of performance stays anywhere between 3.5 and 3.1. I'll explain what that means in a second. But the bottom line is, that's why in these southern states this qualifies for that heat pump tax credit, because it's going to perform well from a cooling perspective and it's more efficient for cooling. But for heating, it's not going to qualify for that because it doesn't perform as well in cold climates. And I'll explain what this number under 5 degrees Fahrenheit, what this number means. But basically, what's happening is this system, this MBH number, means that stands for BTUs per hour, and this is in thousands. So basically 23.2 is 23,200 BTUs per hour of heating capacity, and that's at 47 degrees Fahrenheit. And then when we look at the heating capacity, or the COP, or the coefficient of performance at that number, the COP is 3.53. So what does that mean? Well, COP, or coefficient of performance, means that for 1 watt of heat produced, how many watts of electricity did it take? And so in this instance, a COP of 3.53 means that we are producing 3.53 watts of heat with 1 watt of electricity. And the reason that's relevant is because heat pumps are more efficient than electric resistive heat. And so as long as, and this is a lot more efficient, this is, 350% efficiency increase compared to an electric space heater. And so when you look at, the COP being 3.53, that means that this system at 47 degrees Fahrenheit, for every 1 watt of electricity it consumes, it produces 3.5 watts of heat. Now, if we go down to the efficiency ratings at 5 degrees Fahrenheit, we can see that this system derates down to 13,000 BTUs as its output. So its output is almost cut in half. And then in addition, the COP drops down to 2.2. Now, the COP technically at that lower ambient temperature qualifies for the tax credit eligibility, but the system does not qualify because it does not maintain at least 70% of its output at 47 degrees. And so because the capacity loss is so high at those colder temperatures, this system doesn't qualify for those rebates. So this would not be a great heat pump for a cold climate for that region. And when we look at the Goodman system or the side discharge system, you can see, and we'll do the 2-ton system as well, so you can see, how this performs as well. You can see that on this 2-ton system at 47 degrees, same thing, it puts out 23,200 BTUs of heating capacity. The COP is a little bit less efficient, so it's 3.4. That's why, again, this would be a great system, in a cooling climate where you're really focused more on cooling. But again, when you get down to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, the system derates all the way down to 14,000 BTUs of heating capacity. And the COP still maintains, it's decent, it's at 2. So that portion of the formula would qualify for the tax credit. But this capacity loss is still such that this system is not keeping up well in those colder climates. So in summary, both these systems are going to be good, in a cooling climate. And to kind of articulate my point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up how these systems perform in these higher ambient temperatures. And right now, this is the 5-ton system that I have pulled up. This number right here, IDB, stands for indoor dry bulb temperature. Dry bulb is a measurement of your air temperature on the return. And so this is what we're measuring. So indoor dry bulb right here is 85. This is your entering indoor wet bulb temperature. So wet bulb, same thing. It's just when you're using what's called a sling psychrometer, it's a way that we can tell what it has to do with relative humidity in the air. But bottom line is looking up here at 115 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason I like looking at these high ambient temperatures is you can see with a wet bulb temperature of 71, this 5-ton system actually derates down to about 48,000 BTUs cooling capacity. So it's actually only a 4-ton system at those higher temperatures compared to, at 85 degrees, it's running at 56,000 BTUs in terms of its cooling capacity, which is closer to, it's just under 5 tons. 5 tons would be 60,000 BTUs. So 4.5 would be 52. So it's basically 4 3/4 tons. So there's not much efficiency loss at 85, maybe a little bit of efficiency loss going up to 95, but not much. But the capacity loss does kick in, but it still maintains capacity of a 4-ton system at 115 degrees, which this is going to be during the heat of the day. So that's the hottest part of the day. But 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, once it drops back down to 105 or the sun goes down, then the system is still going to be running at higher capacities. But when we look at the side discharge system, this is where you can see the system really starts to struggle by comparison. So this is a 5-ton version as well of this side discharge system. And you can see that at 95 degrees Fahrenheit, the capacity is actually a little bit higher on this particular system. It's 54.6, whereas it was 53.6 on the GSZ V9, which is the bigger box style condenser. But the side discharge system actually only derates to 54,000 BTUs at 95. However, at 115 degrees Fahrenheit, the system just struggles. It's basically down to a 3-ton system between a 36,000 and 38,000 BTUs, which is just over 3 tons of cooling, and that's out of a 5-ton condenser. And so that's why it's so important to really do, I love doing a deep dive where we dive into the differences between these systems and what really sets them apart. Because on the surface, you're just like, hey, it's a 5-ton system. This is an inverter. The SEER rating 17.2. The SEER rating on this other system, is up to 22.5. So this is more efficient, but they're both inverters. They're both quiet. Like, what's the big differences? Those are the differences you want to look at. So if you're in a really, if you're in a climate where it never gets above 100 or 105 degrees, that Goodman system might work for, air conditioning and actually do a pretty decent job and be at a little bit better price point than this GSZV9. But if you're in a climate that is very demanding, like Phoenix, Arizona, or you live in Palm Springs or anywhere in the desert in California or, Las Vegas, you're going to want to go probably with that GSZV9 or even the 2-stage system, because that's not going to derate at those higher temperatures the same way that this system is. But again, that's only true on the 5-ton system. That's going to vary, it's probably true as well on the 4-ton system, but 3-ton and smaller, the duration is a little bit less, so it might keep up okay. But again, this is something that a local contractor will be aware of, which systems are going to work best in your specific region. And they should also be aware of which systems qualify for, the tax credits based on what they're offering you. So we hope you found that content helpful. And if you happen to be in the market for HVAC system replacement, or if you just recently moved and you need a permanent HVAC company to take care of your regular maintenance and service, click the link in the description below to be connected with a local contractor in your area. We've actually teamed up with a handpicked group of contractors nationwide that maintain the highest customer service ratings on Google, as well as technical excellence. So if you've watched this show and you thought, wow, I'd really like to work with these guys, but it's too bad that they only service a few select areas, I feel you, and that's why we've decided to partner with the best local contractors nationwide in your area, some of which have even been featured on our show. This way, you can find a contractor that's familiar with the latest technology, whether that's cold weather heat pumps or inverter-driven heat pumps that work well on battery backup or solar or inflow radiant heat or any other technology that's specific to your climate or your region. We're partnering with those contractors. So click the link in the description to request an appointment with us or with a vetted HVAC Dope Show contractor in your area. So we hope you found this content helpful, and if you did, please make sure you smash that like button for the algorithm and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. And as promised earlier, there's a few videos popping up on the screen about heat pump efficiency ratings, as well as some videos YouTube thinks you should watch. So make sure you check those out if you haven't done so already, and we will catch you on the next episode.